You think we will go big strikes on mainland Venezuela?
Oh, we'll see what happens. Look, Venezuela is sending us their gang members, their drug dealers, and drugs.
We knocked off actually 3 boats, not 2, but you saw 2. And the problem is there are very few boats out in the water. There are not a lot of boats out in the water. I can't imagine why. Not even fishing boats. Nobody wants to go take a fish.
Nobody wants to go take a fish.
Keep defending this guy. Well, keep defending him, racist.
Right.
Grow old defending this man.
For weeks now, Donald Trump has been ratcheting up tensions with Venezuela. His administration has launched legally dubious attacks and airstrikes against 3 Venezuelan boats. You only saw 2, but there were 3 that he claims were carrying drugs. And now Republicans in Congress are trying to make it easier for Trump to wage all-out war against the drug traffickers. Draft legislation is circulating at the White House and on Capitol Hill that would hand President Trump sweeping power to wage war against drug cartels he deems to be, quote, terrorists, as well as against any nation he says has harbored or aided them, according to people familiar with the matter. The broadly worded proposal would grant sprawling authority to Trump for 5 years to use American military force in a drug trafficking war. It's not clear yet who is behind this legislation, but 3 sources told the New York Times that Representative Corey Mills of Florida was involved in developing the draft. The legislation comes amid backlash to the Trump administration's decision to kill at least 14 people in these airstrikes on alleged narco-trafficking boats. We don't even know that that's what was going on. Yeah,
Congress shall kill if you think they really deserve it.
Congress has not authorized any armed conflict with drug cartels. Plus, critics have also said that Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth have given illegal orders causing special operations troops to target civilians, even if they are suspected of crimes in apparent violation of laws against murder. Jack Goldsmith, a Harvard Law School professor and a former senior Justice Department official under George Bush, described the legislation as a blank check for Trump, right? We know what he does with blank checks. It's insanely broad. This is an open-ended war authorization against an untold number of countries, organizations, and persons that the president could deem within his or its scope. So while Republicans in Congress are trying to hand over more power to Trump, Democrats are doing the opposite. Senators Adam Schiff and Tim Kaine introduced a measure just this morning under the War Powers Resolution that would direct the administration to end any additional planned strikes and reassert congressional authority over the use of military force. The resolution also states that Congress has received insufficient information about the vessels, their threat level, or the legal basis for using force against them, and reaffirms a commitment to funding intelligence gathering, diplomatic tools, and counter narcotics efforts to fight drug trafficking. Trump's escalation has already, though, had consequences. In response to the strikes, Nicolas Maduro, who runs the old country of Venezuela, called on Venezuelan citizens to join civilian militias. He's also launched 3 military drills in recent days and put his Russian fighter jets on display. There are American military positioning and postures near Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands now. I don't know what the end game is. I remember early in the Trump administration, which we are already still in, that Donald Trump wanted to use the military to fight drug trafficking because he said that was the biggest enemy facing our country was. What do you think?
I need listeners to understand one thing. First of all, we don't get our drugs from Venezuela. It's not a thing. We do not get our drugs from Venezuela. The drugs get made, processed in Colombia, Bolivia, Peru. They take those drugs, bring them to Mexico, who shares a border with us, and the Mexican drug cartels bring the drugs to America. Venezuelans there's probably drug traffickers in Venezuela. They don't bring drugs in any significant quantity to America. So that's number one. They're not doing this. They're not the perpetrators of who brings illicit drugs to the country. I'm not suggesting that we should go bomb Mexico or Colombia or Bolivia or anything stupid like that. I'm just saying, point number one, it's BS what they're saying they're doing this for. And number two, that begs the question, well, why? It seems like they want to do a regime change. It seems like they're trying to set up a pretext for them to go in there and get rid of Maduro, which I think, of course, would be a complete and utter disaster for us to send American troops to Venezuela for that.
Yeah, John, I think that's the most logical read into this, is that he wants to go into a country that he claims is sending its criminals and its drugs. And Waz is right. This is not a drug-producing nation or a drug trafficking nation. Trinidad has said, Trinidad's very close to Venezuela geographically, has said that they don't even have a problem with their drugs coming from Venezuela. Their drugs are coming from elsewhere, the sovereign nation of Trinidad and Tobago. So. John,
you're right, and I'd like to point out that Donald Trump has pulled so much law enforcement off the drug war and onto chasing down brown people at church picnics, that cocaine has flooded the American market and the price of cocaine has plummeted. So if you're looking to get into coke, folks, if you've been saving it, the right midlife crisis, fall 2025 could be the time. This is everywhere.
The best news. This is the best news I've heard in weeks.
Cocaine is cheaper now because no one's chasing it anymore. They're chasing down your nanny to throw her into a torture gulag. This is not about drugs. This disgusting little. This isn't even a bill. This is like a drunk Bond villain drafting a note. This guy who says windmills cause cancer, he's going to have legal authority to murder people if he decides they're narco terrorists. What does that even mean? If you sold weed in college, congratulations, you're a military target now. Like, can the Sackler family be narco terrorists? Do Walgreens pharmacists got to wear a bulletproof Kevlar? But this is not about drugs, and it's not about terrorism. I think it's about keeping the spotlight by inventing new enemies whenever the Epstein hearings or indictments are coming back into the news. This is just distract, inflame, kill people, repeat. And I really want to point out, since these people are revoltingly false Christians who despise everything Jesus talked about, that is what my book's about. If you are into murdering people because you think they might have drugs and vaporizing the whole boat so you don't really ever have evidence, smart law enforcement would take them alive, put the dope on the table, have a press conference, shake them down, get their... Yeah. They don't want to do that. They don't care if there's drugs there. They're vaporizing the evidence. They're messy and they're into killing people. Don't let these folks call themselves pro-life. They hate due process and they're really into murdering brown people. No 3 strikes, no questions asked. The media is not going to call them anti-life. The media is not going to call them murderers. Donald Trump is he executed more prisoners than any on the federal level than any president in 100 years. They love killing people. Congress should take this bill and burn it up and salt the language afterwards. But Congress is really, I think they're tired of being a branch of government. I think they're ready to outsource democracy to a guy who bankrupted 3 casinos and just let him do it, because I don't see them doing anything to protest this. There's also a chance this is just another suck-up bill that's not meant to go anywhere and it's never going to pass. But
that's true, and there is precedent for that. They want to kill
brown people with no questions asked.
Yeah, it is very possible that's the case. And then this is how screwed up things are. When I hear that we're putting military near Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, what do I think? I think, why those 2 places? Obviously, they're nowhere. They're closer than you and I and Waz are right now to Venezuela, but they're not right down the block from Venezuela. I think it's because Stacey Plaskett was who was the delegate from the Virgin Islands, was an impeachment manager against Donald Trump, and the island of Puerto Rico mocks Donald Trump constantly since the hurricane there, and they can't stand him. And the mayor at that time was one of the most vocal anti-Trumpers. That's how screwed up. It probably has nothing to do with what I just said, but that's how sort of ill-advised his impulses are and his motivations.
Saving so much money for the taxpayers. Remember 20 years ago how they hated us for telling the truth about Bush and Cheney?
Yeah.
Try to find a Republican who will defend Bush and Cheney today. Within 10 years, half of these MAGAs are going to be denying they ever voted for this guy after 20.
So true.
Yeah,
they're going to be denying they ever voted for him, the way they deny how much they loved Bush and Cheney now.
Yeah, that's really true. And you referred to your book. I had no idea you'd written a book, so that's nice news.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.